That'll do it for me, Kingswood. Yow! Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the show. We had a bit of a wonky schedule this week here at Kingswood, only about 2.5 days of total school, and we even had our recording software try to take us down yesterday, but none of that's going to stop us from getting you a show. We're here now, so let's talk to you about, like we always do, starting with the NFL. A couple more weeks have passed us by, a couple more things have happened, so let's just get right to it. First little bit of news I want to talk about. Tom Brady surpassed 100,000 total passing yards playoff and regular season. Obviously, it's a great accomplishment for him. He deserves all the credit in the world for it. The only weird thing that I think about it is that I remember last year in the NBA, LeBron James passed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's scoring record for playoff and regular season points. Nobody really talked about it because really the big record that everybody cares about is the regular season points, which LeBron is likely to break this year. And while I'm not saying people were wrong to not pay attention to that accolade by LeBron last year, I do think it's a little odd that we didn't celebrate that accolade, but on like ESPN and all the sports shows, there were like actual countdowns showing how far he was from surpassing 100,000 yards. Obviously, again, no hate for Tom Brady here. Obviously, I've kind of talked rough about him because he's not having the greatest season in the world. I still think he should hang him up after this season, but I just think it's a little odd, the different standards that we're holding people to. But again, great job, Brady. You've had a great career, but maybe it's time to end it. Moving on to another older quarterback. I was right about the Packers. I'm sorry. I'm not going to hear it from anybody anymore. Like, they're just so unbelievably disappointing in every facet of the game. And listen, I've ragged a lot on Aaron Rodgers, and a lot of people have ragged a lot on Aaron Rodgers, deservedly so. He's the quarterback of the team, and when a team underperforms, the first place to look is the quarterback. But to his credit, it's not like the rest of the team is playing fantastic football either. A lot of this does have to fall on Matt LaFleur because the special teams just looks completely unbuttoned up. The defense on the back end is a mess. The front seven is okay, I guess. They did not do a good job of replacing Devontae Adams. Aaron Jones just looks unmotivated to play. And the offensive line isn't horrible, but they usually have great offensive line. So the fact that it's average means they've taken a pretty big step back, and that's not the greatest thing in the world if you're Aaron Rodgers and you're an aging quarterback. He's going to turn 39 this season. I don't know, man. Do you look into trading Aaron Rodgers, or do you look into trading a couple other guys to try to get some pieces for Aaron Rodgers? Because you either got to go all in on contending for the next 2 years, or you got to go all in on the future. Because you can't have both at this stage and at this age. Moving on, the Patriots look okay. I'm not going to make any grandiose statements about them right now. They're third in the division, or no, excuse me, they're actually fourth in the division, despite the fact that they have a winning record, just because the Dolphins, Bills, and now the Jets have all been quite good this season. Obviously, the Dolphins are undefeated when Tua starts and finishes the game. The Jets just got one against Buffalo. We'll talk about that, and Buffalo is still Buffalo. But I said this at the beginning of the season, and I'm sticking by it now. I'm not overly concerned about the Patriots making the playoffs and making a deep playoff run this year. My biggest concern is the development of Mac Jones. And he's looked okay this year in the times he has played. It's just a little concerning that he hasn't taken a bigger step than he has. Now, admittedly, this is probably some of the Patriot fan in me talking, getting a little over-worried. Because if you remember, Josh Allen took 3 years before he looked really good. Patrick Mahomes didn't play at all his first year except the Week 17 game against the Broncos, and that was not a very good Denver Broncos team. And even in that game, Mahomes didn't look great, but then obviously the next season he went out and he won MVP. Lamar Jackson was basically a hood ornament for the Ravens offense in his rookie year. A lot of these guys just take some time to develop, and it really just comes down to the organization and the fan base to be patient enough to let it happen. But it is, I will admit, a little concerning to me personally that he's not making some of these throws. Comes back to bite me again. But hey, like I said, I'm probably just overreacting. He looks okay, so I'm going to take that for now. And let's move on to a little bit more news in the AFC East. The Jets got one against the Bills, and I don't think I understand how. Because for all intents and purposes, the Bills should have won that game. They got the better quarterback. They got the better defense. They got the better weapons. They got basically the better everything. The only thing that maybe you could say is, well, maybe Robert Saleh is a better head coach than the Bills. But I really don't think so because, like, yeah, sure, he hasn't been coaching for that long, so we don't know. But that's a pretty staunch Bills coaching staff for the Jets to live up to. But, hey, the Jets are good. They play good defense. They run the ball well. Zach Wilson does not play particularly great football, but again, he's another guy who's in his second year, so I wouldn't be concerned about that if you're a Jets fan. And he plays well enough for them to win, and they're obviously not looking to win a Super Bowl this year, so hey, this is a great step if you're the Jets and a great sign if you're a Jets fan. And then for Buffalo, remember a couple weeks back when I talked about Buffalo, and I talked about the game they had against the Packers, where a win against the Packers wouldn't prove anything to me, but a loss would create a lot of problems. So I lied a little bit because I said that was going to be like a Packers game-specific thing. It wasn't. Wins for this point with Buffalo don't prove anything to me, but the losses speak volumes. While the Jets are not a bad team this year, losing to them, Buffalo, you're supposed to be better than them. You're trying to win a Super Bowl. You got to be able to beat the Jets, and rather soundly at that, and they lost to them. So I'm not saying they're out of it. I'm not saying they can't win the Super Bowl at this point, but that is not a great sign considering the Chiefs, their biggest rival in conference, are starting to play some of their better football. And oh, by the way, there's another team that's starting to play some of its better football. So let's move on and talk about them, the Baltimore Ravens. And let's talk more specifically about Lamar Jackson. Lamar, I will fully ready to admit, is an inconsistent quarterback. But here's the thing. He wins so many games. And that's the thing that we need to really focus on. I know it's not always pretty. He doesn't have the 60-yard bombs like Mahomes does. He doesn't, do crazy stuff that you've never seen before like Josh Allen. And you know what? He's not surgical like Tom Brady was or like Mac Jones is developing to be. But he wins games because he plays a style of football that nobody can prepare for because he's the only person in the history of the league who can do the things he does. Yes. Does he win all his games? Absolutely not. No quarterback does. Does he win every game where he falls behind? Absolutely not. No quarterback does, except for Patrick Mahomes. And by the way, if your standard is Patrick Mahomes, your standard is too high. Has he won a Super Bowl yet? No, but that's certainly within the realm of possibility, and he's already won a playoff game. We always freak out with these young quarterbacks like, oh, they've only won the one playoff game, and then they're already 3 years into their career. We got to remember, these fast starts for quarterbacks that we're seeing now are not especially common. Yeah, Tom Brady got off to a hot start. Patrick Mahomes is getting off to a hot start. Josh Allen's getting off to not a hot start, but a pretty okay start. But that's not normal, Like Lamar Jackson is a franchise quarterback who can do things that you can't replace. You've built your roster around him. You have to pay him. You have to secure him for the future. I'm not going to tell you he's going to be your quarterback for 20 years because, frankly, I don't believe that. I think Lamar is a 10, 12, maybe 15-year quarterback who's going to slowly start to slow down. He's going to become more of a pocket passer, and that's where you're going to see his impact start to diminish a little bit. But he is a franchise guy, and when you stumble upon a franchise quarterback, you have to pay them for the long term. Moving on, let's talk about the NBA a little bit. Obviously, a couple weeks ago, we had our Whiteboard Wednesday segment where we talked about just the beginning of the season, like 2 or 3 games have passed at that point. Now we're about 10, 11 games into the season. A few more things have happened, a couple more things to note, a couple things to expand upon that I've already talked about. So let's not waste any more time and get right into it. So last couple weeks ago, when I was talking about the NBA, I talked about how the Jazz had actually gotten off to a really good start in spite of the fact that they were trying to lose. Well, that has actually continued, and I believe, this may be wrong, but up until recently at the very least, they were the 1 seed in the Western Conference. And I got to admit, it's impressive, but if you're Danny Ainge, you have to be pulling your hair out right now. Because last year, when you wanted to win, you couldn't. They were like the 6th seed, I think. I don't know. They were really disappointing. And now this year, when they're trying to do bad, they're playing way above their pay grade, and they're the 1 seed, and it's like, listen, this is definitely not a team that can win a championship, so what's even the point when you're giving up Victor Wembanyama? They've got a really interesting roster. They've got Colin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen. They got some really interesting pieces, and that could be really good trade pieces if they did end up wanting to really commit to the tank. But if they want to keep contending, this isn't a half-bad core. I didn't see it coming before the start of the year, but look at them go, man. I'm proud of them. Moving on to a team that is good and was supposed to be good, the Milwaukee Bucks. I believe they are currently 10-1, although that I could be 1 or 2 games off on that. And their most recent win that I've seen was their game against the Thunder, I believe it was. And Giannis didn't play. I don't believe Chris Middleton or Drew Holiday played, and yet they still won. And a lot of people would be quick to point out that it was a close game. They won by 3. And while that's true, that is a tiny bit concerning because the Thunder are just not a very good team. I like it. Because what that shows me is that this team can play close games. And obviously, if their big 3 had played, they would have blown them out anyway. But against a better team, they probably wouldn't have blown them out, even if there were their big three there. But that shows me, I know Giannis can perform in the clutch. I know Chris Middleton can perform in the clutch. I know Drew Holiday's going to be fine. What that shows me is that the rest of the roster is getting used to and getting ready for those close playoff games against good teams that are going to give them trouble down the stretch in the fourth quarter. This is a really good sign if you're a Bucks fan, because their biggest problem last year, they went to Game 7 and they had a bad fourth quarter against the Celtics. Now, obviously, they didn't have Chris Middleton, and as a Celtics fan, I will fully admit, the Bucks win that series if Chris Middleton is healthy. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But this really, I have a lot more confidence now in them winning the title than I did before, because now I know everybody on that roster is ready for a close game. It's not just their big guys, because it doesn't matter how good your star is. If the rest of the roster chokes, it's going to look like everybody choked. You remember LeBron it was the 2018 Finals. It was Game 1. He had 51, 8, and 8 against the Warriors, and then the rest of the team gagged around him and they lost the game. Even though LeBron played incredibly well in that fourth quarter, there was just nothing he could do. Speaking of LeBron James, I think it's finally time to admit that he's slowing down. It's sad to see because he's just such a great player. Obviously, everybody knows that, but he's just so ridiculously talented, and it makes me sad to see him slowing down like this. He's still a good offensive player, don't get me wrong. He's never going to be what he was on defense again, though. And his elevation on some of his fadeaway jump shots and some of the dunks and layups is just starting to not be there as much anymore. And obviously, he's dealt with some injuries this season and the past couple seasons, but it's just kind of sad to see that he's going out on a team that's not particularly great. They're 2-9 right now. It's just sad for me. But he's likely to pass Kareem's scoring record this year, so that he's got something to look forward to. And who knows, maybe after that the Lakers trade him, he can live kind of a Tim Duncan, if you remember the Spurs in the early 2010s when they had a couple of championship runs and one championship win, I believe. Tim Duncan obviously wasn't what he was on offense anymore, but he was still able to lead that team emotionally, and he still provided some good veteran leadership. And he was still able to contribute on the defensive end. LeBron would kind of be the reverse of that, where his defense wouldn't be very good, but he'd be able to contribute with his distribution. He's still able to attack the rim from time to time, and he can get hot from three. Don't forget that. Obviously, he hasn't started the season off very great from three, but he's going to get back. I have confidence in him. Moving on to a guy who's almost like a younger LeBron, but not quite. Luka Doncic. He has been playing absolutely insane basketball as of up to right now. I believe the last 2 games he scored 24 points. Before that, every game of the season he had dropped 30, and 3/4 of those games had been triple-doubles. And he was starting to get into conversations with Wilt Chamberlain in terms of games in a row scoring 30. Now, obviously, he was never going to break that record because Wilt Chamberlain's numbers, if you know anything about basketball, are you read them and you don't believe them. He scored 100 points in a game. He scored 50 10 games in a row. He averaged 50 for a season. He scored 30 for 200 straight games, something like that. So obviously Luka was never going to be able to touch that. But the fact that he was getting on lists with Wilt Chamberlain statistics, even if he was farther down than Wilt, it's still insane. I think he's probably going to be the MVP of the NBA this year. And hey man, I was talking about how I don't think the Mavericks can take that next step because they're not a good enough roster around Luka. I didn't take into account what I like to call the LeBron effects. Because in 2007, LeBron was on a god-awful Cavs team, but they won 55 games or something, and they went to the finals, and they beat the Pistons in the Eastern Conference. And they got swept by the Spurs because, of course, they did. The Spurs were really good. But I always forget that great players in basketball can carry a team like nobody's business. It's not like football, so look out for that. And finally, moving on to the team that most of you probably care the most about. I know the team I care the most about, the Celtics. They've started off the season pretty well. Nothing crazy, but, they've played pretty good basketball as of late, especially the 2 stars, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. We actually made a graphic that has some of their stats, if we could get that. This right now, it's a little bit out of date, but it's about what they're averaging. Jason Tatum's at 31, 4 assists, 7.5 rebounds, 50, 37, 88 splits. Jaylen Brown's at 25, 3, 7, 45, 34, 85 splits. I'd like to see a little bit better shooting out of Jaylen Brown, but other than that, I have really no complaints about those stat lines. Tatum right now is a career high in points, second highest in rebounds. I believe it's the second highest in assists. Jaylen Brown's basically just doing what he always does, but what he always does is really good, so I'm not going to sit here and complain about that. Couple of cliff notes at the bottom there. Obviously, they're still one of the best defensive duos in basketball. They're a very scary duo to go up against if you're an offense. They have now even more playoff experience after that finals run last year, having so many 7-game series. And by the way, they were already a very experienced playoff team before that, but now they know what the full thing feels like, and that's really big for a roster like that. Speaking of the roster, this feels like the best fit with a roster that they've ever had in their careers. Now, maybe I'm remembering wrong, but it just feels like this team really is very cohesive. And the team last year was also very cohesive. But this team has the Malcolm Brogdon effect off of the bench. They obviously still have Smart. They still have Horford. They're going to get Robert Williams back. The defense coheses very well. And while Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown don't have the greatest playmaking, they have enough guys around them who can playmake that I never get super worried about it, at the very least in this regular season. And honestly, I think what is the biggest factor is that now they have something to prove. They got, let's be honest with each other, outright embarrassed last year in the finals against that Warriors team with Steph Curry and company. And now they're coming back and they're like, all right, we need to show the world that we're not playoff chokers. We can do this. We can succeed in the postseason. So now they're playing with a fire and intensity that they didn't have in the first half of last season, and that they gained, and then it fizzled out in that finals. Now it feels like they have that fire, and it feels like they're going to keep it throughout the whole season. So this team, I'm not sure that they're better than the Bucks, but I think they're going to give the Bucks a real run for their money. I think they're better than a team like the Sixers. I think they're obviously better than the Knicks, because I think most teams are better than the Knicks, but they're still in the play-in conversation, so I have to mention them. There are a couple concerns I have, admittedly. Jaylen has looked somewhat iffy. I think that's strong wording for it. I apologize because that was me who wrote it, but looking back on it, I think I was being a little bit hyperbolic. He's just had a couple games here and there where he hasn't looked great. His shooting splits haven't been the best. Obviously, only 34% from three isn't horrible, but it's not ideal for a guy who's a bit more of a perimeter player. And then they both need better assist numbers. I talked about how they got guys around them who can play make, and I'm not concerned about it during the regular season, but come the postseason, what really did kill them in that finals against the Warriors was their lack of playmaking. They played a little bit too much iso ball for my taste, and I think it really stagnated their offense. Whenever they did pass, the passes would get picked off by the Warriors. They'd get easy fast break points, and then the Warriors would just converge on whoever called the iso. They'd miss the shot. The Warriors would go back down, have some good ball movement, and they'd make a shot. So it was all just bad last year in the finals. So that's why I'd like to see, they're at 4-3 respectively. Maybe get closer to 4-5. I mean, if I'm greedy, 5-6. I don't think either of them are ever going to be a 7 assist a game guy. But it would be nice to see them get closer to maybe, half of double digits, something like that. But that's going to do it for the NBA talk for now. We can get the graphic on the screen. Thank you very much. And we'll be right back with 2-minute headlines after this. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 2-Minute Headlines. It's the segment that writes itself. It's called 2-Minute Headlines, and I have 2 minutes to do the headlines. There's really no confusion that I can see happening, so let's just get started. 2 minutes on the clock. First thing, World Cup coming up soon. This isn't quite a headline, but I couldn't find another place to throw it in the show, so I just threw it here. I'm aware that the World Cup is coming up. I'm not the biggest soccer fan, admittedly, but I am a big fan of the World Cup just because people get so into it, and I get a lot of joy out of that. And the U.S. men's team has a really good chance of being a lot better than they have been over the past couple World Cups, because they have been awful over the past couple World Cups. And now they got a chance to do something. I believe they're in a group with England, Wales, and Iran. It would be hilarious if we beat England. I don't know that it's going to happen, but it would be so funny. So I'm really just hoping for that. Moving on, LeBron has a leg injury. I kind of worded that wrong. That's on me. He had, obviously, the foot injury that was bothering him, but he came back to play, and then he exited his game against the Clippers with leg soreness, and that kept him out of the subsequent game. Again, it's just going back to what I was talking about earlier about how LeBron James is slowing down. Father Time, with all the injuries, is starting to catch up to him. For the first, 15 years of his career, he never had anything. Ever since he's gotten to L.A., it's always been a little something here and there. Like I said, it's just sad to see, but I understand it. I'm never going to fault LeBron for getting injured. I'm never going to fault anybody for getting injured, really. Josh Allen injury, he had a little bit of an elbow thing that kept him out of practice a couple times this week. This is very concerning if you're the Bills because you're going up against the Vikings, and this is a big game because you're already losing ground in the division. The Jets have the same record as them, except that the Bills have one less loss just because they've had their bye week and the Jets haven't. So if they lose this week, all the Jets have to do is just stay the course, and they will be first in the division, and they might be the 1 seed. I actually can't remember. I know the Bills are the 1 seed right now. I'm not sure who would take over if the Bills lost. And finally, the Panthers beat the Falcons. Yeah, this was just last night, Thursday Night Football. Nothing crazy in this game. Not very great teams playing each other. I just figured I'd bring it up because it did in fact happen, and I would feel like I did something wrong if I didn't bring it up. But yeah, it happened. The Falcons are so weird because they have like 3 different quarterbacks. P.J. Walker looks like okay, but I don't, and that's going to be 2 minutes. All right, well, I'll talk more about the Panthers another time. That's a lie, I probably won't. And we'll be right back at the desk after this. All right, and now's the point in the show where we hit our Kingswood Sports just news and not really announcement this week, not too much happening. I'd like to start off by congratulating the boys varsity soccer team. They made it all the way to the finals, won a couple playoff games, but unfortunately could not beat Oyster River. They lost 1-0 in the championship. But I'd just like to congratulate them on a fantastic season. It's the best Kingswood soccer has ever had, and it's the best that any Kingswood team has had that while I've been here. A lot of great players in that team. Obviously, they had a lot of seniors. You feel bad for them, but they've got a lot of young guys who are going to only get better next year. So congrats to Coach Nelson. Congrats to everybody on that roster on a great season. No reason to get down on yourselves. You played fantastically. You just came up against a really good team at the wrong time. And subsequently, congratulations to every Kingswood sports team who participated in the fall athletics. I know volleyball made the playoffs. Unfortunately, they lost, but it was just great season all around for everybody. A lot of room for improvement for us, which is exciting because we were already pretty good this year. So yeah, just congratulations to everybody. You all did a great job. Winter sports starting up soon. Get some Kingswood basketball talk, some alpine skiing talk. That'll be fun. And we're going to move on to our last topic of the day, which is going to take us back to the NBA and the Brooklyn Nets. They've been just an abject mess this year, and I just want to dive into each individual thing because it just makes my blood boil. We're going to start off with Ben Simmons because he's somehow the least offensive out of all of these, and he's still pretty offensive. He just doesn't look great. And I know why. I get it. He's had a lot of issues. He had a back injury, and then obviously he had the mental health stuff. I'm never going to get on him for the mental health thing. Mental health is a very serious topic. But what infuriates me is that he has not gotten better. And what I mean by that is, if you remember in his rookie year, his rookie year he didn't play, and then he played his second year and he won Rookie of the Year. That was a whole controversy. We're going to move past that. Remember in his rookie year, he did a lot of things really well. He had basically just one hole in his game, and it was shooting. Second year comes around, still has one hole in his game. It's shooting. Excuse me. Third year comes around. Oh, what do you know? He has one hole in his game, and it's still the shooting. It's just, if you took Ben Simmons right now and you shaved the beard, and then you sent him back in time and you had him put on a 76ers uniform, I'm not sure anybody would notice the difference because he's the same player. He's a great defender, both on the interior and on the perimeter. He's a great rebounder. He can distribute. He can score on the inside, but he can't shoot. And I don't know if it's that he won't work on it or he's just physically incapable of developing a shot. But either way, that is infuriating. Because if you remember when he was coming out, he was getting comparisons to the Irvin Magic Johnson. And you might say, well, Magic Johnson couldn't shoot either. Yeah, at the beginning of his career, but he picked up a shot because it was helpful to his game. He shot like 36% from three one year, which in the 80s might as well have been 45%. It's so infuriating to me that a guy with that much talent can't fill the one hole in his game. Because if he did, I don't even want to think about what he'd be. He'd be an MVP. He'd be a Defensive Player of the Year. He'd be incredible. But he just can't fill that one hole. And now it's gotten worse because now he doesn't even want to shoot close to the basket. I mean, obviously, we all made the jokes a couple years ago against Atlanta. He was literally standing underneath the rim with the ball, and he passed. And it's like, dude, Trae Young is the only guy who's on you, and he was like 10 feet away. All you had to do was jump in the air and dunk, and he didn't even want to do that. It was just embarrassing. And obviously, the free throw shooting became a whole thing. He's kind of improved on that, admittedly, but it's still just infuriating to me that a guy with that much talent can't seem to get it right. But let's move on to who most people see as the bigger offender and who I agree is the bigger offender, Kyrie Irving. Let's do a little history lesson of Kyrie Irving's career since 2017. So in 2017, they go to the finals and they lose. He's with the Cavs, obviously, and they lose because they're playing against the Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Andre Iguodala, Throw whatever names you want on there. It was probably the greatest basketball team ever assembled, and they lost 4-1. That summer, he demands a trade because he wants to be his own man. I disagree with the choice because I think it's a stupid idea to leave LeBron James, but fine. He goes to the Celtics. They start out 22-4. Great. He gets injured, unfortunately. But the team rallies, even without Kyrie, and by the way, Gordon Hayward got hurt that year too, and they go all the way to the conference finals. They take LeBron James to 7 games. Jason Tatum looks great. Jaylen Brown looks great. Marcus Smart looks great. Terry Rozier looks great. So people are thinking to themselves, well, they made it to the conference finals, took LeBron 7 games, and they're getting Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward back, who are 2 certified superstars, right, guys? Well, let's talk about that. Because the next year, LeBron isn't in the East anymore. So your only obstacle is Giannis, who at the time had proven nothing, and who continued to prove nothing for the next 3 or 4 years. And what happens? The team implodes because Kyrie Irving, who wanted to be a leader and wanted to be his own man, could not lead and refused to let anybody else play basketball. And it's like, Kyrie, this was your chance to really be what you wanted. Because what Kyrie didn't seem to understand is that when you're the superstar on a team, obviously, yes, you're going to average the most points. You're going to get the most shot attempts. You're going to get all the numbers. You're going to get all the gaudy attention. But part of being a superstar and part of being the best player on a team is recognizing when somebody else is having a good night and letting them go. When Jason Tatum is having a great night from 3, you just got to pass to him. Don't shoot your own threes. Kyrie never understood that. And this really showed itself in the playoffs, when we went up against said Milwaukee Bucks and said MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo. And Kyrie demanded to guard Giannis. Now, Kyrie is a far better defender than I will ever be. But by NBA standards, Kyrie is an awful defender, and Giannis is almost a foot taller than he is. Why he, on God's green earth, decided he needed to guard Giannis, I do not know. But fine, whatever. You know what? We're going to go into next year. We've learned from our mistakes. We're going to run it back with this roster. No, actually, Kyrie left again after promising he would re-sign. Okay, so now he's in Brooklyn with Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant's hurt the first year. You know what this is, Kyrie? This is another opportunity for you to be the leader that you really said you wanted to be, man. I want to be my own man. I want to do it myself. And what happens? He misses a bunch of games due to injury, and then when the bubble comes around, what happens? Oh, that's right. He refused to go. He was one of the few guys who refused to go to the bubble. Kyrie, if you want to lead a basketball team, you have to play basketball. And you think he would have learned that after that year, but he didn't. Because the next year, he was, in January, just so utterly beside himself about what happened at the Capitol building. Oh, it's horrible. I have to miss 10 games. Pardon you? No. Listen, everybody watched it on TV. Everybody had very strong reactions to it. Nobody skipped work because of it. Get out of here, Kyrie. You still have a job. You have to show up to work. And oh, by the way, he then sunk the team by refusing to get vaccinated. And here's the thing. I would almost accept it if it weren't for the fact that he just refused to explain why. He was like, I want to be a voice for the voiceless. But then he didn't say why. Kyrie, you can't be a voice for the voiceless without using your voice. It's in the name. I don't know. Okay, and then this year, he's just playing awful. Like, just downright playing awful. And then he posts and promotes a movie on social media that, from what he thought it was a pro-black culture movie. Fine. And no arguments here. Bell strikes again. No arguments here from that. But the problem was Kyrie did not do his research. Because what else was in that movie but some anti-Semitic remarks and some anti-Semitic propaganda. Now, I don't want to get too heavy into politics on this show, but I'm just going to come right out and say it. Saying I'm sorry doesn't excuse anti-Semitism, and Kyrie didn't even say I'm sorry until the Nets suspended him because he is so thick in the head. He thinks he is so smart when in fact he is one of the dumbest people in the entire National Basketball Association. It is infuriating. And oh, by the way, since he got suspended, the Nets defense has looked so good. So, like, Nets, I'm not saying get rid of him, but you look a lot better without him. And by the way, speaking of the Nets looking better, you know what else made them look better? They finally got rid of Steve Nash. Steve Nash has been unqualified to be a head coach since a week before he got the job, when Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant went on a podcast and said, hey, we don't even need a head coach. So clearly they didn't respect him because they wanted him, but even after they got him and they knew they were going to get him, they still just said, yeah, but we don't really need him. Nets, why would you keep him for 2.5 years if you knew that the players didn't respect him, and the only adjustment he made in the 2021 playoffs, when they were playing the Bucks, the series went to 7 games, they had a real shot to win, go to the finals, and get a championship. The only adjustment he made was, I'm going to play Kevin Durant 48 minutes. Duh! I would have made that adjustment, and I am not nearly as qualified to be a head coach as Steve Nash is. Like, he made Mike Budenholzer look like Greg Popovich. And Mike Budenholzer isn't even that good, man. But, to their credit, they did get rid of him. And who did they replace him with? Maybe they'll go after Ime Udoka. You know, he got to the Celtics in the finals, and he was an assistant on the Nets. You know, he worked at the Spurs culture. Maybe they could go after Greg Popovich. Because Greg Popovich obviously doesn't want to tank, but the Spurs are trying to tank right now. No, they got Jacques Vaughn. A lot of you probably don't know who Jacques Vaughn is. Here's the only thing you need to know about Jacques Vaughn. There are over 400 coaches in the history of the NBA who have coached at least 200 games. Of those coaches, Jacques Vaughn has the 4th worst winning percentage. And that's who they hired to replace their underqualified coach. Yeah, they're punting the season away. Not on purpose. They don't know it yet, but they've punted the season away. And I hear a lot of people saying, yeah, but I mean, the roster's so good. Once they get Kyrie back, you know, if Ben Simmons develops a little bit, they're going to be fine. I don't know about that, because, well, if Kyrie was playing his best basketball, and KD was playing his best basketball, and Ben Simmons was playing his best basketball, and, you know, they got Joe Harris, they got a lot of shooters, even then, I don't think they're better than the Bucks. I don't even really think they're that much better than the Celtics. I don't think they're really that much better than the Sixers. And these playoff series can go either way, man. A team can be a little bit worse than you, but if you have a couple bad games, that team can very easily beat you. But you know what the worst thing is about the Nets? You know the thing that really just, you know what really grinds my gears? They have made me feel bad for Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant, who made the single weakest move in the history of the NBA when he went to the Golden State Warriors after blowing a 3-1 lead to them. Kevin Durant, who has threatened people and defended himself on Twitter, both on his main account and on burner accounts. Kevin Durant, who at any chance he gets, throws everybody else under the bus. They have made me feel bad for him, of all the people on the planet, because he's the only guy who feels like he wants to play ball. He's the only guy who's actually focusing on basketball. I mean, when the Kyrie thing happened, he literally just looked at the report and he's like, can we just talk about basketball, please? This is utterly infuriating. And I feel bad for him because all he wants to do is hoop, but the rest of the organization is a clown show. Nets, this is a mess. You went all in, and you went all in on the wrong guys at the wrong time in the wrong place. I don't know why I get so mad about this, because I don't care about the Nets at all, but it's just infuriating to watch great players waste their careers, and that's basically the story of the Nets. Finally, our Get Real LVP of the week is going to go to the entirety of the Philadelphia Phillies roster. Now, you might be noticed that the World Series ended not too long ago, and the Astros won it, and yet I have not talked about baseball at all on this show. That is because, if you remember, I talked quite a lot of trash about the Astros and said some not very nice things. And I begged the Phillies to win this series. The Phillies did not win this series. They took a 2-1 lead and they lost 3 straight. How dare you? I am disgusted with you, but let's talk about the winners for a second, because whenever a team wins a championship, you want to talk about them. The Astros won a World Series. This one, my hands are tied here. That was fair and square. There was no sign stealing. There was no trash can banging. None of that. They won a World Series. They won fair and square. They played incredibly well. They got hot at the right time. Credit to everybody on that roster. Credit to all the managers, the owners, the general managers. You guys had a good season. I'm not happy about it. Not happy about it. but you did have a good season. And that is going to do it for our show this week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you to the multimedia department for making this all possible, and I will see you all in 2 weeks.